A millionaire spots a poor girl sitting on the street with her 2-year-old child, then realizes he knows her. What he did next left everyone speechless. Jordan Michelson had just stepped out of the gym, wiping the last traces of sweat from his neck as he waited for his driver. The evening air was cooler than usual, the sky above turning a soft gray blue as the city wound down from its daily chaos. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. Maybe the meeting he had the next morning, or whether he'd stop for a protein smoothie on the way home. Then his eyes caught something, or someone. Across the street, near a bus stop bench stained with age and rusted at the edges, sat a woman on the ground. Her head was bowed, shoulders curled inward like someone trying to disappear. In her lap was a small child, a toddler, wrapped in a thin blanket and softly whimpering, the kind of cry that wasn't loud, but desperate. The woman rocked her gently, whispering something that got swallowed by the city noise. Jordan's gaze lingered longer than it should have. There was something about the curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell in front of her face, the defeated way her hand clutched the child to her chest. Something about her. His heart paused. No, it couldn't be. He narrowed his eyes, took a hesitant step off the curb, and then another. The closer he got, the more real it became. The woman's face slowly came into focus. Her clothes were oversized, clearly second-hand, her shoes worn thin at the sole. She looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. But underneath all the exhaustion and dirt, it was unmistakable. His voice cracked slightly. "Amelia?" The woman raised her head slowly, as though even lifting her gaze required effort. Her eyes met his. For a moment, nothing moved. Then her lips parted, barely. Dan?" Her voice was softer than he remembered. Brittle, like it hadn't been used to say something joyful in a very long time. He stood there, stunned. Everything in his world, the deals, the cars, the houses, the meetings, faded away in that 1 second. He was staring at a girl he used to know, a girl who used to carry notebooks with poetry scribbled in the margins, a girl who had once smiled without fear. Now she looked nothing like that girl. "What are you doing here?" he asked, stepping closer, not bothering to hide the worry in his voice. "Sitting on the ground? Are you okay?" Amelia blinked quickly, trying to steady herself. Her eyes were red, the skin under them hollow and bruised from sleepless nights. She looked down at the child, then back at him. We're fine," she said quietly. "Just needed some air, that's all." But Jordan could see right through it. The toddler in her arms whimpered again. Amelia instinctively rocked her back and forth, trying to soothe her, but it wasn't enough. Jordan looked at them both, Amelia's hunched figure, the child's frail little body, the hopelessness hanging between them like fog, and something in him cracked. "You can't be out here like this," he said gently. "Come with me. My driver's just around the corner. I'll take you both somewhere warm." She flinched slightly, as if the offer itself was painful. "No, Jordan, we'll be okay. I don't want to be a burden. You don't have to do that." "You're not a burden, Amelia," he replied, kneeling slightly to meet her eye level. "I can't leave you here. Not like this. Not with a baby in your arms." She hesitated, looked away. Her fingers gently combed through her daughter's tangled curls. He waited. For a moment she didn't say anything, but her silence said everything. She wasn't just tired, she was at the end of something, and there was nothing left behind her to return to. Still kneeling beside her, Jordan reached for the blanket covering the child. "What's her name?" he asked softly. "Hope," Amelia whispered, barely audible. He smiled faintly, sadness tightening in his chest. "Hope," he repeated, like the name itself meant something more now. "She's beautiful." The toddler blinked at him, too tired to smile, but calm for the first time in a while. Jordan stood slowly and extended his hand. "Come on, please." Amelia looked up at him again, her eyes swimming with confusion, shame, and disbelief. It had been years. High school felt like another lifetime. And now here he was, the boy she barely remembered, standing like a bridge between the life she'd lost and a lifeline she never expected. She bit her lower lip, her throat tight. She wanted to say no. She wanted to hold on to pride, but pride didn't feed a child. Pride didn't keep her safe. She nodded once. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Jordan reached down and helped her to her feet. She held Hope close as they crossed the street together, silent, unsure, but finally, not alone. Just as they reached the curb, A sleek black car turned the corner and pulled up beside them. "Mr. Mickelson," the driver said, stepping out. "You ready to head?" Jordan cut him off with a glance. "We'll need one more seat." The driver opened the door without another word. Amelia hesitated before stepping inside. She looked back at the bench for a second, the one she had been sitting on less than 10 minutes ago, and wondered how the world could change that quickly. Jordan got in beside her. The car pulled away, and in that moment, the lives of 3 people, 1 man, 1 woman, and 1 tiny child named Hope, began to shift in a way that none of them could have possibly seen coming. The car ride was silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, just a heavy one. Like the kind of silence that fills the space between 2 people who both know this moment means something, but neither one knows what to say yet. Jordan sat quietly on one side of the back seat, his eyes drifting between the lights outside and the woman seated next to him. Amelia was staring out the window, her cheek pressed lightly against the glass, her face half lit by the passing street lamps. She hadn't spoken a word since she stepped into the car. In her arms, the little girl had finally stopped crying. Her head rested gently on Amelia's shoulder, her tiny fists relaxed, her breathing even. Jordan couldn't stop staring, not in a rude way, but in that quiet, stunned kind of way when your brain is still trying to catch up with what your eyes are seeing. This was Amelia Ford, the girl who used to walk through the school library in denim jackets and notebooks full of quotes, the girl who once won a state writing competition and didn't even tell anyone about it. And now she was here, fragile, silent, with a 2-year-old sleeping against her chest like a lifeline. Jordan kept replaying the moment he saw her on the sidewalk, the way she looked up, the way her voice broke when she said his name. He tried to picture what must have happened between then and now, the gap between high school dreams and sitting on cold pavement with a child in your arms. But he didn't ask. Not yet. He knew better than to rush stories that took years to survive. Next to him, Amelia tightened her arms slightly around Hope. She hadn't even looked at him since the car started moving. She just kept her eyes on the passing buildings. Her reflection in the glass looked hollow, but there was something deeper there, too. A quiet kind of shame that wasn't loud or dramatic, just tired. She didn't want him to see her like this. Her hair was messy. Her jeans were ripped at the knee. Her hands were dry from cold air and soap made for kitchen counters, not skin. She knew she didn't belong in this car, not with its leather seats, soft lights, and the man beside her who smelled like expensive cologne and clean sweat. The last thing she wanted was pity, but she didn't have the strength to argue anymore. So she sat still, let the warmth of the car wrap around her like a blanket she hadn't felt in years. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself breathe. Her eyelids fluttered. She hadn't slept properly in days. Not real sleep. Not the kind where your body lets go and your mind stops scanning for danger. And now, here she was, in a car she never could have afforded, beside a man she never thought she'd see again, with her child finally quiet, and sleep waiting like a gentle whisper at the edge of her mind. She blinked again, let her head rest slightly back, and slowly, her body surrendered. Jordan looked at her once more. Her chin had tilted to the side, Hope still in her arms, both of them breathing softly now. He looked away, his throat tight. He didn't know exactly what he was doing. He just knew one thing. He couldn't let her go back to that sidewalk. The car pulled up to the house 20 minutes later. The gates opened automatically, revealing a long stone driveway lined with soft garden lights and tall hedges. The car curved toward the entrance of a sleek, modern mansion. Tall glass windows, smooth concrete walls, and soft ambient lighting that made the whole structure glow in the night like a private retreat. The engine shut off quietly. Amelia stirred awake. She blinked, confused for a moment, then looked down at Hope, still asleep, still warm in her arms. The driver stepped out first, then Jordan. He opened her door gently. "We're here," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She stepped out slowly, her eyes rising to take in the house before her. It looked like something out of a dream, the kind of place that didn't just cost money, it demanded it. Glass walls, tall ceilings, a curved front entrance that made the house feel like it was built to be admired. Every line was clean, every surface polished. She took a small step forward. "Are you sure? We're allowed here?" she whispered, her voice so low it nearly disappeared into the night. Jordan turned to her, his hands in his pockets. A quiet smile touched his lips. I own it. She stared at him, speechless. The door opened as if it had been waiting. A soft glow spilled out onto the steps, and a woman in a black uniform stood in the doorway, older, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and a professional posture. Maria, Jordan said calmly, this is Amelia and her daughter. Please show them to the guest suite upstairs. Make sure there's a hot bath, fresh clothes, and bring something warm for them to eat. No questions. Maria nodded once, her expression unreadable, then stepped aside. Amelia hesitated, clutching Hope a little tighter. Jordan noticed. It's okay. You're safe here. She nodded slowly, her feet moving almost against her will as she followed Maria inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around her instantly, not just the heat, but the silence, the way the walls hummed softly, the way the lights dimmed gently instead of blinking harshly, the way the carpet felt like clouds under her worn shoes. As she walked through the hallway, her eyes drifted over the furniture, the artwork, the stillness. Everything looked untouched, as if someone lived here, but never really sat down. It didn't feel cold, just quiet, like money had built the house, but something else was missing. Maria led her up the wide staircase, saying nothing, only pointing where necessary. Amelia reached the guest suite. The door opened, and there it was, a room larger than any place she'd stayed in over the last 2 years. A bed that looked like it belonged in a movie, curtains taller than her body, a bathroom that glowed softly, and on the dresser, a tiny folded blanket, clearly for a child. She didn't know what to say. Maria gestured toward the bath. I'll return shortly with food and clothes, she said simply, then stepped out. Amelia stood frozen for a moment. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, Hope still in her arms. The child stirred, opened her eyes sleepily, and looked up at her mother. For the first time in what felt like forever, Amelia smiled. A real smile. Not because everything was okay, but because, maybe for the first time, she believed it could be. The smell of warm food drifted up the stairs long before Amelia ever stepped down. She had bathed slowly, almost nervously, like she was afraid someone would come knocking at the door and tell her it was all a mistake. The hot water had stung her skin at first, not from heat but from surprise. It had been so long since her body felt cared for, since it felt like she was allowed to just stand still and breathe. Hope had slept through the bath. She was now bundled in fresh, soft clothes, her small body limp with exhaustion, head resting against her mother's shoulder. Amelia had found a simple gray cotton dress folded neatly on the bed, along with a comb and a hair tie. It was nothing extravagant, but it might as well have been made of gold. She brushed her hair slowly, quietly, watching herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, not because she was cleaner, but because for the first time in a long while, she looked less afraid. Still, as she stepped out into the hallway and began walking toward the sound of soft jazz playing somewhere below, her heart beat faster. It all felt too kind, too clean, too much. She reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. The house was quiet, except for the low music and the faint clinking of silverware. She turned a corner, and there he was. Jordan stood beside the long, warmly lit dining table. His sleeves were rolled up. A glass of water sat untouched in front of him. 2 plates had been laid out, not by a chef, but by him. There was nothing extravagant on the table. No wine, no candles. Just a bowl of rice, grilled chicken, and steamed vegetables. Warm, simple, real. When he saw her, he smiled. You made it down, he said softly, setting his phone aside. Amelia nodded, her arms adjusting Hope gently against her shoulder. The child was still asleep, peaceful as ever. Jordan stepped forward. Here, let me take her, he offered. She stiffened slightly, just for a second, then handed Hope over carefully. He took the child with surprising ease, cradling her with the kind of gentleness that made something ache in Amelia's chest. He carried her over to a small couch in the corner and laid her down, covering her with a blanket that had already been placed there, as if he knew they'd need it. Then he turned back to her and gestured toward the dining table. Come, he said. Sit. She hesitated. Everything in her wanted to step back, to say no, to find an excuse. I'm not hungry, I'm fine, maybe later. Anything to not feel the shame rising in her throat. But her body betrayed her. She stepped forward, pulled out a chair, and sat. The first few seconds were quiet. Her eyes stayed on the plate, warm rice, roasted carrots, tender chicken. She picked up the fork with trembling fingers, then stopped. Tears welled up before the first bite even touched her lips. She dropped the fork, covering her face with one hand as the tears broke through. Slow at first, then harder. She wasn't sobbing, she wasn't making any sound at all. But the way her shoulders shook, the way her face crumpled, it was grief, exhaustion, relief, shanitude, all wrapped into one unbearable emotion. Jordan said nothing at first, then softly, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You don't have to apologize," he said gently. "You don't even have to explain. You're just here, that's enough." She wiped her face quickly, trying to smile but failing. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't deserve any of this." Jordan leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, his voice calm but firm. "You don't deserve what life gave you," he said. This is just kindness." She stared at him, and for the first time that night her guard began to lower. Not completely, but just enough. She picked up the fork again, took a small bite, chewed slowly, and cried silently as she ate, the kind of tears that cleanse more than they break. Jordan didn't interrupt her. He didn't fill the silence with small talk or questions. He just sat there, letting the moment be what it was, quiet, raw, and full of meaning. For that 1 hour, there were no expectations, no past, no future, just a woman who had walked through hell and a man who had seen her, really seen her, and decided she didn't have to walk any further alone. The room was silent, except for the slow, steady rhythm of Hope's breathing and the occasional creak of the wind brushing against the tall windows. The lights had been dimmed to a warm amber glow. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender. And for the first time in years, Amelia Ford was not sleeping with one eye open. She lay curled up on the edge of the bed, Hope tucked into her side, both of them fully surrendered to a kind of sleep most people take for granted. Deep, still, unafraid. No buzzing fluorescent lights above her head, no baby crying in the next shelter bed, no plastic mattress on cold concrete, no security guards banging on doors in the middle of the night. Just quiet and warmth and safety. Jordan stood just outside the guest suite, watching the light peek through the partially closed door. He didn't enter. He didn't want to break the spell. But something in him couldn't walk away either. Maria, the housekeeper, approached quietly from the hallway, her voice low. "Shall I prepare something for her to wear in the morning?" Jordan shook his head gently. "No alarms, no chores. Let her rest," he said. "As long as she wants, just rest." Maria nodded and stepped away, leaving Jordan alone. He turned slowly and made his way downstairs, the soft soles of his shoes nearly silent against the polished floor. The house was still, but his mind wasn't. He walked into the living room, sat down, and stood up again. His body refused to relax. He began pacing, hands in his pockets, brows drawn, his thoughts loud in the quiet. What happened to her? He kept asking himself the same question, over and over. How did someone like Amelia, someone so brilliant, so gentle, end up like that? He remembered her from school, the way she always sat in the back corner of the library, sketching ideas or quietly reading. She was never loud, never tried to impress anyone, but she had a light, not the kind that tried to steal attention, but the kind that glowed from within. Quiet confidence, thoughtful words, a soft laugh that felt real when most of high school didn't. Jordan hadn't spoken to her much back then, a few passing words, one shared assignment in English class, but even after all those years, her presence stayed with him, the way some people just leave a mark. And now she had been sitting on the pavement, tired, hungry, holding a 2-year-old, like the world had completely forgotten her. He stopped pacing and stood at the window, looking out into the dark night beyond the city lights. He had seen suffering before, in documentaries, on the street. He donated to causes, funded shelters, even spoke at a fundraiser once. But this was different. This wasn't some statistic. This was someone he knew, someone he remembered, someone who had deserved so much more. He leaned against the window frame and exhaled slowly. There were so many questions running through his head. Where had she been all this time? What had happened to her family? Who was the father of her child? Why hadn't she asked for help? And why did seeing her like that hit him so hard? He wasn't a man easily rattled. He'd been in boardrooms with billionaires, negotiated deals that affected hundreds of jobs, handled crises that would have broken most people. But this, Amelia, broke through all of that. He sat down again, this time slower, his thoughts no quieter, but his heart heavier. Maybe tomorrow she would tell him everything, but for tonight she was safe, and that was all that mattered. The morning sunlight poured in gently through the tall curtains, spilling across the soft cream sheets and warming the edge of the mattress. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, their sound delicate, like a lullaby whispered at the end of a dream. For a few seconds, Amelia didn't open her eyes. She simply lay there, unsure of where she was. The silence was too still, too kind. Her body didn't ache from sleeping on the floor. Her back wasn't curled against cold walls. There were no sharp footsteps overhead, no coughing from across the hall, no blaring alarm clock reminding her to leave before the shelter closed its doors. It was quiet, and that, more than anything, confused her. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking into the brightness. The ceiling above her was smooth, white, not stained. She turned her head and saw Hope still asleep beside her, curled into a small bundle beneath the covers, her lips slightly parted in peaceful breath. Amelia sat up. She looked around the room, half expecting someone to appear in the doorway and say it had all been a mistake, that she wasn't supposed to be here, that she'd overstayed her welcome, that her time was up. But the room remained silent, still warm, still hers, at least for now. She slid quietly off the bed and crossed the room barefoot, drawn to the light leaking from behind the curtain. She pulled it back gently, and there it was again, the proof this wasn't a dream. The view, the garden below, the stillness, the distance from everything that had ever broken her. She let the curtain fall and turned to Hope, who had just begun to stir. Her daughter stretched her tiny arms, blinked open her eyes, and looked around sleepily. For the first time in what felt like forever, Amelia didn't have to rush. She didn't have to stuff clothes into a bag, grab leftover crackers, or scan the street for danger. For once, she didn't have to fight the morning. She just let it come. A soft knock broke the stillness. She turned quickly, her heart leaping out of habit. But it was gentle, not urgent, not angry. Maria's voice followed through the door, calm and respectful. "Breakfast is ready, whenever you're ready." Amelia hesitated, then whispered back, "Okay, thank you." She helped Hope get dressed in the fresh clothes laid out for her, then changed into the same gray cotton dress she wore the night before. She tied her hair back, smoothed down the wrinkles with her palm, and took one last glance at herself in the mirror. She didn't recognize the woman yet, but she didn't look broken. She picked Hope up and walked downstairs slowly. In the dining room, Jordan was already seated, sipping tea and scanning something on his tablet. He looked up the moment he heard her steps. He stood, not out of formality, but instinct, like something in him always shifted when she entered the room. "Good morning," he said softly. Amelia nodded. "Morning." Hope buried her face in her mother's shoulder, still half asleep. "Come," Jordan gestured toward the table. "There's enough to feed a village." The table was laid out, but not in a showy way. Toast, eggs, oatmeal, slices of fruit, a small bowl of strawberries. No silver domes, no five-course presentation. Just real food, thoughtfully prepared. She sat down quietly, placing Hope in the seat beside her. They ate in near silence at first, only the sounds of utensils and small sips filling the room. Then, without looking up, Jordan spoke, voice calm, careful. "I want you to know something." Amelia glanced at him. "You can stay here," he said, eyes meeting hers. "As long as you need, no deadline, no rush, you don't owe me anything." There was no pity in his tone, no hidden motive, just a quiet sincerity that caught her off guard. She swallowed, her throat tight. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask how long he meant, or what the conditions were, or if it would change tomorrow. Because right now, in this fragile moment, all she could hold on to was that one soft truth. She wasn't being asked to leave. Not today. And for someone who had spent years being pushed out of everywhere she tried to rest, that alone felt like a miracle. For the first few days, Hope didn't speak much. She stayed close to Amelia, always just a step behind or clinging softly to her clothes. Her eyes, wide and cautious, scanned every corner of the house like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She didn't cry often, not in the way you'd expect a 2-year-old to. But sometimes she'd jolt awake from naps, breathing fast, clutching at her mother like the room might vanish if she let go. Jordan noticed everything. He didn't push. He didn't try to charm her with silly faces or big gestures. He just stayed near, spoke softly, gave her space. Sometimes, while Amelia was in the kitchen or folding clothes that Maria had already folded twice, he would sit on the carpet with a picture book in hand and simply read aloud, not expecting anything in return, just letting his voice drift softly through the room like background music. Sometimes Hope would look over, sometimes she wouldn't, but he kept doing it anyway. On the third morning, he came home with something unexpected. Amelia was in the living room, gently brushing Hope's hair, when she heard the front door open. She turned and Jordan walked in holding a small pink stroller. In his other hand was a gift bag. "I wasn't sure if she had one," he said casually, setting it down near the couch. "I passed by a store after my meeting and, well, it looked like it belonged to her." Amelia stared at it, a soft pink stroller, brand new, wheels untouched, still smelling of clean plastic and fabric dye. Hope's eyes lit up instantly. She reached for it, hesitated, looked at her mother, then at Jordan. Her little fingers gripped the handle. She didn't smile, not yet, but her hands didn't let go either. "There's more," Jordan said gently, pulling items from the bag. A stuffed rabbit with floppy ears, a box of crayons, and a hardback children's book titled When I Feel Safe. Amelia was still. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out to take the book. She didn't speak, just nodded once, like if she tried to talk, the emotion might spill out all at once. Over the next week, small changes started to happen. Hope began to wander a few feet away from her mother without panicking. She followed Jordan from room to room with quiet curiosity, still shy, still silent, but watching, noticing. She liked music. Amelia discovered that one afternoon when Jordan sat at the upright piano in the back room and began playing softly. It was an old, slightly dusty piano he rarely touched, but now, with a 2-year-old audience, he found his fingers moving across the keys again. Hope didn't say a word, but she sat on the floor nearby, crayon in hand, coloring silently while the notes wrapped around her like a lullaby. Jordan never mentioned it, but one evening while Amelia was resting upstairs, he made a quiet call to a woman he trusted, the director of a local daycare. The next day they visited together. Hope didn't let go of Amelia's hand during the tour, not even once. But she looked, she listened, she stared at the other children, the colors on the walls, the shelves of books and toys and nap mats that didn't smell like old cleaning supplies. "She doesn't have to stay," Jordan whispered gently, sensing Amelia's nerves. "Just see how it feels." Amelia didn't reply, but when they left, she turned to him in the car and asked, "Do they have space for next week?" Jordan smiled. "I already asked. They do." The first morning Amelia dropped her off. Hope clung to her leg, crying softly, terrified in a way that only children who've known too much instability understand. Amelia had to kneel down, press her forehead against Hope's, and whisper, "Just a few hours, okay? I'll be back before you even finish your snack." It wasn't easy, but it happened. And when Amelia returned to pick her up that afternoon, she found Hope asleep on a beanbag, a half-finished drawing of a smiling sun in her lap. That night, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, watching her daughter sleep, belly full, cheeks flushed, fingers still holding the ear of the new rabbit toy. Jordan passed by the door, saw her sitting there, and paused. He knocked softly. "You okay?" Amelia turned, her eyes glistening in the dim light. She nodded slowly, then spoke, almost like a confession. "No one's ever done this for me." Her voice cracked. "Ever." Jordan didn't reply right away. He walked over and sat in the nearby chair, his posture relaxed, his eyes full of something gentle and grounded. "You deserve more than just survival, Amelia," he said softly. She swallowed, blinking fast. He didn't say it like it was a compliment. He said it like it was a fact, like someone telling her the sky was blue or that fire was warm. Something true, something that couldn't be argued with. She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd entered that house, she believed him. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind where the sky melts into a soft navy blue and the whole house feels like it's holding its breath. Hope had gone to bed early. Amelia had just finished folding some of her daughter's clothes, neatly stacking them on a chair in the corner of her room. Downstairs, Jordan was in the study, reviewing contracts he didn't have the energy to care about. There was a silence between them lately, not cold, not awkward, just full of things unsaid. That night, he walked out to the patio where the air was cool and the stars looked close enough to touch. Amelia was already there, seated on the low bench, a blanket draped across her knees, a half-full mug of tea in her hands. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just out into the dark, the kind of stare people give when they're remembering things they wish they could forget. Jordan stood behind her for a moment before speaking. "Amelia," she turned her head slightly, acknowledging him, but didn't say anything. He stepped closer. "Can I ask something?" Her shoulders shifted. She knew what was coming. She nodded, just once. He sat down beside her, close enough to be near, far enough to let her breathe. "What happened?" he asked softly. "I mean, how did it get to that point, out there, with hope, like that?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Then slowly, Amelia set the mug down and folded her hands in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, flat, almost. "His name was Isaac," she said. Jordan didn't interrupt. "He was charming," she continued. "Too charming, maybe. The kind of person who makes you feel like you're the only one in the room. At first, I thought he was just bold, confident. He talked about starting businesses, traveling the world, building something real. Said he wanted to take me with him, build it together." She laughed bitterly, then looked down at her hands. "I was young. I was stupid." "No," Jordan said gently, but she waved it off. "He made me feel seen," she said, "like I mattered. No one had ever looked at me the way he did. And when he talked about the future, it sounded like hope, like something solid." Her voice trembled now. "So I believed him, all of it. When he said he needed funding for his startup, I didn't question it. I took out what I had. Sold my mom's house after she passed. It was the only thing left. My car, my savings. Even emptied out a college fund that was supposed to get me back on my feet one day." She paused, her fingers tightening. "I gave it all to him, every last bit." Jordan sat still, jaw beginning to clench. "One day," she continued, "he left to finalize a deal in another city. Said he'd be gone a few days. I didn't hear from him after that." Her voice cracked just a little. "His number stopped working. Social media deleted. I went to his apartment and it was empty, like he was never even real." Jordan's throat tightened. "I slept on a friend's couch for a few days after that. Then I found out I was pregnant." She looked up at the night sky and her next words came out in a whisper. "I wanted to die." Jordan turned his head toward her slowly. "I didn't see the point. I had nothing. No money, no place, no one. I remember sitting in the back of a 24-hour laundromat at 2 in the morning, thinking maybe I could just disappear." She paused, her eyes wet now. And then she kicked. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, even though it was flat now. I still remember that exact moment. It was the first time I felt her move, like she was saying, "You're not done yet." Jordan looked away, blinking fast. "That kick," Amelia said, her voice trembling now, "saved my life." She wiped her eyes roughly, as if ashamed of the tears. "I didn't want to be a mother. I didn't even know how. But I couldn't leave her. I couldn't give up if she was still fighting to live inside me." Jordan said nothing for a long time. His hands were clenched so tightly on his lap that his knuckles had turned pale. His jaw was locked. He didn't even realize how tightly he was breathing until he exhaled, slow and heavy. The idea of someone using Amelia like that, sweet, trusting Amelia, made something dark rise inside him. A part of him wanted to find Isaac and make him feel the exact kind of pain he had caused. Every ounce of fear, every second of shame, every night spent cold, hungry, scared. But when he looked at her again, at the weight in her eyes, the quiet grief still living under her skin, he knew revenge wouldn't help. What she needed wasn't fury, it was peace. And so, Jordan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, and spoke with calm certainty. "That won't ever happen again," he said. "I won't let it." Amelia looked at him, not with surprise, but with something else, something that made her chest ache and her throat tighten. She nodded slowly. Then, without saying anything more, she stood and walked back inside. That night, she didn't cry herself to sleep. She didn't wake in panic. She didn't dream of being chased or abandoned or forgotten. She slept deeply, fully, like someone who, for the first time in years, believed she might finally be safe. Days passed. Not in a rush, not in chaos, but in gentle, quiet rhythms Amelia wasn't used to. Hope had adjusted surprisingly fast. She started returning from daycare with scribbles of color and tiny stickers on her hands. She still didn't talk much, but she smiled more, laughed sometimes. Her voice no longer sounded scared, it sounded small in the way toddlers' voices should, unbothered, free. And while Amelia was grateful, deeply, endlessly grateful, something in her began to ache. At first, it was just a whisper of discomfort, a feeling she couldn't quite name, but it grew louder with each passing day. She woke up each morning in a clean bed, ate warm food she didn't have to cook, walked through a house she didn't pay for, with heat and water and light that never threatened to disappear. There were no bills waiting, no noise, no panic. But there was something else, emptiness. She had spent years doing, struggling, fighting, fixing, worrying, surviving. Every second of every day had been accounted for, hustling for just enough, chasing just a scrap of dignity. And now, with all of that lifted, she didn't know where to place her hands. She felt like a guest in a world she hadn't earned. Jordan never made her feel this way. He was kind, thoughtful, never asked her to do anything, never held it over her head. But that made it harder. The easier he made her life, the more she felt like she didn't belong in it. She started pacing again, cleaning up toys that were already neatly stacked, wiping counters that were already spotless, rearranging bookshelves when no one was looking. And one evening, after Hope had fallen asleep, Amelia tiptoed downstairs barefoot, moving through the quiet house like a whisper. She entered the kitchen and stared at the few dishes left in the sink. Not many, just enough. She rolled up the sleeves of her sweater, turned on the warm tap, and began to wash. The feel of water on her hands, the clink of ceramic, the smell of soap, it grounded her. It reminded her she was useful. She was so focused she didn't hear the footsteps behind her. "Hey!" She jumped a little, startled, turning around quickly. Jordan stood at the kitchen entrance, leaning gently against the doorway. He wasn't angry, just surprised. I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I just saw the dishes and I thought—" He raised a hand calmly. "You don't have to explain," he said, "but you know the maid will do that in the morning." Amelia looked down, embarrassed. "I know, I can't sit around all day. I need to do something. Please, just let me do this." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, not in desperation, but in honesty. Jordan stepped into the room slowly. He didn't touch her, didn't try to stop her. He just stood beside the sink for a moment, watching her hands move over the plates. Then quietly, he picked up a towel and began drying. They worked in silence. When they were done, she thanked him. He only nodded. That night, after Amelia had gone to bed and the house had gone still again, Jordan sat alone in the study, staring at a blank page in his notebook. He wasn't thinking about business or meetings or anything he usually filled his time with. He was thinking about her. What do you give to someone who's been stripped of everything? What do you offer a person who's been betrayed by the very things that were supposed to protect them? She didn't want favors. She didn't want comfort, even if she needed it. She wanted purpose. What can I give her that's truly hers? He thought. Something she could own, something that could never be taken away again. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Amelia arrived, a quiet idea began to form. The next morning started like most others. Soft light filtering in through the high windows, birds somewhere in the trees outside, and the faint clinking of breakfast being prepared downstairs. Amelia sat at the dining table with her hands curled around a warm mug of tea. Hope was in daycare already, a routine that had become strangely comforting. The silence was peaceful, but underneath it was a quiet hum in her chest. She felt like something was approaching, something just out of view. Jordan walked into the room casually, dressed down in a sweater and jeans instead of his usual suit. He poured himself coffee, then joined her at the table. They talked about small things at first, the weather, Hope's drawings, a recent documentary Jordan had half-watched the night before. Amelia smiled, nodded, listened, but something in his tone shifted, subtle but deliberate. Then, without warning, he looked at her with that calm, focused expression he often wore when speaking in boardrooms, the kind that meant he was about to say something important. "Amelia," he said, his voice gentle, "what do you love to do?" She blinked. The question caught her completely off guard. She looked down at her tea. thinking. It had been so long since anyone had asked her that. Longer still since she'd allowed herself to even consider such a question. I don't know, she said after a moment. I used to dream of fashion, maybe, or business. I liked organizing things, designing, putting pieces together and making something new. Her voice trailed off, growing smaller with each word. But that was a long time ago, before everything. Now I have no degree, no experience. I've been out of the world too long. I don't have anything. Jordan leaned back slightly, studying her. That's not true, he said. She looked at him. I see a woman who raised a child alone with nothing, he said. Who built a life out of scraps and still found a way to keep going. You don't have nothing. You have strength and vision and the kind of resilience you can't teach in school. She smiled faintly but shook her head. That's kind of you, but I'm not qualified to do anything. Not really. Jordan's voice didn't waver. You're capable. That's enough. I believe in you. She blinked again, slower this time. Something in her chest tightened. Something good. Something terrifying. What are you saying? She asked quietly. He leaned forward. I want to enroll you in an online university, he said. You can study business or fashion, whatever path you want to take. I'll cover everything. In the meantime, I want to give you a position in one of my companies. Something real, a junior management role. You'll learn as you go. You'll grow with it. Amelia froze. She stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. You want me to work for you? I want you to work with me, he corrected softly. And one day, work for yourself, if that's what you want. Her hands tightened around the mug again. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh or run out of the room. I can't, she said quietly. I mean, what if I mess it up? Jordan smiled. Then you'll learn, and then you'll get better. That's how growth works. She looked down, her throat tightening. Why are you doing this? She whispered. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and then said, because you deserve more than a second chance. You deserve a future you choose. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Amelia's shoulders shook slightly, and this time the tears came, but they were different. They weren't the tears of defeat or exhaustion or fear. They were the quiet tears of someone who had lived in darkness so long they forgot what light looked like, and now it was finally breaking through. She nodded slowly, barely able to speak. Okay, she whispered. Yes, I'll try. Jordan smiled, and for the first time her yes didn't come from desperation. It came from hope. Time didn't leap forward. It didn't rush. It moved gently, day by day, like a wound learning how to scar over without splitting open again. Amelia's days became filled with small, meaningful rhythms. Mornings began with soft alarms, not fear. Hope, now adjusting comfortably to daycare, giggled more, asked for songs, and dragged her stuffed bunny around like it was a living companion. Amelia packed her snacks, braided her hair, and kissed her forehead at the front door, the way mothers in storybooks did, the way she never imagined she'd be able to. Once Hope was dropped off, Amelia sat at the dining room table, laptop open, books spread out like puzzle pieces waiting to be solved. She had officially enrolled in her first set of business classes online. Principles of management, financial basics, creative marketing. The words had once sounded intimidating, now they sounded like opportunity. At first, she doubted herself. The numbers were confusing, the language was formal, but every time she wanted to quit, she remembered what Jordan had said. You're capable. That's enough. So she pushed forward, and slowly she started to get it. Jordan never hovered. He never micromanaged or checked over her shoulder. But every now and then, she'd find a new notebook left by her laptop, a bookmarked article on strategy, a handwritten note in the margins of a textbook that read, I think you'll like this chapter. He gave her room to grow, and in doing so, gave her a place to rise. There were moments of quiet joy. Amelia began to laugh more, real laughter, not the kind that covered pain, but the kind that escaped when she forgot she had reasons to be guarded. Sometimes Jordan would walk past the study and see her seated on the floor with Hope, crayons everywhere, music playing softly in the background. Amelia would be mid-laugh, her head tilted back, completely unguarded, and something in his chest would pull. He never said it aloud, but the way he looked at her began to change. At night, after Hope was tucked in and the house had quieted, Amelia would find herself in the kitchen making tea. Most times, Jordan would wander in too, like some unspoken agreement had been made between them to share those late hours. They'd talk, not about trauma or dreams, but about little things. Books, childhood memories, awkward teenage years. One night, they argued over who was more introverted in high school. Another night, they laughed until Amelia snorted over a story Jordan told about accidentally deleting an entire investor report. It was easy, uncomplicated. Yet beneath it all, there was something slowly building. Jordan had started watching her more closely, not in a possessive way, but in admiration. The way she bit her lip when reading something complex, the way her eyes widened when she grasped a new concept, the way she held hope with one arm while writing with the other. Like she was constantly balancing the world and never letting it fall. Amelia noticed him too, the quiet strength in him, the way he listened without interrupting, the way he moved through his world with intention, but not arrogance. She'd catch herself watching him from across the room, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled up, looking over notes with his head slightly tilted. The moments began stacking, a hand that lingered too long on her shoulder, an accidental brush in the hallway, eyes that met and stayed there. Neither of them spoke it, neither dared to name it. It was too soon, too fragile. Amelia was still healing. Jordan was still figuring out the edges of his feelings. They didn't want to ruin the peace they had finally found. So they danced around it, that rising feeling, like a song they both knew, but were afraid to sing out loud. But it was there, in the silence between them, in the comfort of shared space, in the way her presence softened his edges, and his gave her space to become someone new. Something was growing between them, quietly, carefully, and neither of them quite knew where it would lead, but for now, neither one of them was pulling away. It had been almost 2 months since Amelia and Hope first stepped into Jordan's world, and everything, in its own subtle, unspoken way, had changed. One evening, after a particularly long day, Amelia came home from the company office Jordan had placed her in, carrying a small box of paperwork and a crumpled drawing Hope had made in daycare. It was late, and she looked tired, but in a different way now. The kind of tired that comes from effort, not despair, from movement, not chaos. Jordan had been waiting in the living room, seated quietly, flipping through a book he wasn't really reading. When Amelia walked in, he stood and met her halfway. "There's something I want to give you," he said, voice low, almost cautious. She looked at him, eyebrows raised, amused. "What is it? Another textbook?" He smiled faintly. "Not this time." He handed her a small white box. It wasn't fancy, no glitter, no velvet, just a plain ribbon tied carefully around it. Simple, elegant. She looked at it in her hands for a moment before untying the bow. Inside was a necklace, delicate silver chain, a small pendant in the shape of a feather, thin, detailed, almost weightless. She stared at it and for a moment couldn't speak. "I saw it last week," Jordan said. "It reminded me of you." "Why a feather?" she asked softly. He shrugged, hands in his pockets. "Because feathers are light, but they come from things that fly." Amelia looked down at the necklace again. It was the kind of gift that didn't scream wealth. It whispered intention. It wasn't expensive. It was thoughtful, chosen. She touched the pendant gently, as if afraid it might disappear. "Thank you," she said, voice nearly a whisper. Jordan nodded, but didn't sit. He stood there for a moment longer, as if he was on the edge of saying something else, something real, something heavy. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. She looked up at him, waiting, but he smiled instead, the kind of smile that carries restraint, and said only, "You should get some rest. You look tired." And with that, he turned and walked back toward the hallway, disappearing before she could ask the question sitting on her tongue. Because the truth was, he had almost told her. Almost. The words had been there, right at the edge of his throat. "I think I'm falling for you. I think I've been falling for a while." But something held him back. "She's healing," he told himself. Let her be. He didn't want to rush her, didn't want to confuse comfort with pressure. He could feel how delicate the balance was, how far she'd come, and how fragile that progress still might be. So he let the words sit in silence. And in her room, Amelia held the necklace in her palm, her thumb running slowly over the tiny grooves of the feather. She hadn't expected a gift. She hadn't expected to feel this, the warmth in her chest, the flutter of something unfamiliar and terrifying. She sat on the bed, Hope asleep beside her, and stared at the wall, the same spot she stared at on the nights she couldn't find sleep. But tonight, it wasn't the past keeping her awake. It was the future. She liked Jordan. More than liked. She had begun to trust him, something she hadn't done in years. And that scared her more than anything. Because what if she was reading it all wrong? What if this was temporary? What if one day he looked at her the way Isaac once did, with that silent disappointment, that shift in posture, that slow pulling away? What if she was just another project, a woman to rescue and release? What if I'm just a burden again? What if he changes? She clutched the necklace tighter in her hand, closed her eyes, and told herself not to feel too much. But it was already too late. Because somewhere in the quiet of that house, behind all the unspoken words and gentle smiles, two hearts were already falling. They just didn't know how to land yet. It happened on a quiet evening. Amelia had just finished a long day balancing work and study. Hope was already asleep, curled beside her with one arm wrapped around her bunny. Jordan was out, attending a brief business dinner, and the house felt unusually still, peaceful. She sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through her phone, mostly reading emails from her professor, texts from the daycare, and some motivational videos she'd saved weeks ago. And then, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The preview lit up her screen with just 5 words. "Can we talk? I miss you." She stared at it. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen open, hands clammy, chest tightening. The number wasn't saved, but she didn't need to ask who it was. Only one person in this world could send such a short, haunting sentence and shatter her entire sense of safety in seconds. Isaac. She hadn't seen or heard from him since the day he vanished, since he took her money, her trust, her future, and left her pregnant and alone. And now, out of nowhere, "I miss you?" The audacity made her want to scream. The fear made her freeze. She looked over at Hope, sleeping soundly in her pajamas, unaware that the man who helped bring her into the world had just ghosted back into it with a single text. Amelia's breathing grew uneven. Her mind raced. What does he want? Why now? Is he nearby? Has he seen us? She stared at the message one more time. Then, with a long breath, she pressed delete. She didn't reply. She didn't tell Jordan. She couldn't. She didn't want to reopen that chapter, didn't want to invite worry or pity or confrontation. She was just starting to feel safe again. She wouldn't let Isaac take that from her. That night, after tucking Hope in again, Amelia walked slowly to the window and checked the latch, then checked it again and again. Then moved to the front door, turning the lock twice before returning to her room. She lay awake long after the house went quiet, her eyes wide open in the dark, heart still thudding. Some ghosts didn't need to knock. Sometimes they just texted. A week passed, maybe more. She tried not to count the days. She told herself it was over, that the message had been a desperate, one-time attempt to reach her, and nothing more. She was busy with work, with hope, with studies. She didn't have time to unravel. But fear, it doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it waits, patiently, in the corners of everyday life. And then it walks right up to you. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. The sun was already dropping behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement. Amelia had just stepped out of the company's building, her purse slung over her shoulder, car keys in hand. She was texting Jordan, telling him she'd pick up Hope from daycare instead of the nanny today. Then she looked up and froze. About 30 feet ahead, walking directly toward her, was him. Isaac, same eyes, same crooked smile, same slow, confident walk, but everything else had changed. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair grown out and uneven. He looked thinner, maybe even weaker. But his eyes were the same, charming, manipulative, searching. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Her feet wouldn't move. He raised a hand halfway, casually, like he was greeting an old friend. Then his voice, "Amelia." Her mouth went dry. "What are you doing here?" she finally managed, each word clipped sharp. He smiled faintly, his eyes sliding from her face down to her shoes, her tailored outfit, her watch. "You look amazing," he said, his tone casual. "Really good. Wow, I always knew you'd—" "Don't," she snapped, cutting him off. "Don't act like we're friends. You abandoned me. You abandoned your daughter." A few people walking by turned their heads. Isaac glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I made mistakes, okay? But I'm not here to argue. I need help. Things haven't been easy. She laughed, cold, humorless. You think life's been easy for me? You stole everything I had. I know, he said, raising both hands, trying to look remorseful. But I'm not asking for much. Just a little help. Just this once. She stared at him, her jaw clenched. Everything in her wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something. But she didn't. She had learned silence could be more powerful than 1,000 words. She turned and walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't speak. Isaac didn't follow. But long after she drove away, his presence stayed behind like a shadow, clinging to the air around her, lingering in the creases of her thoughts. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, blinking back the tears she swore she wouldn't let fall. She had walked away once before, pregnant, broke, and alone. This time, she was walking away with power. But it still hurt, because some wounds never stop aching, not even after they've healed. That night, Amelia couldn't keep it in anymore. She had tried. She had smiled through dinner, laughed softly when Jordan mentioned Hope's newfound obsession with alphabet songs. She had even managed to clear her work inbox before bedtime. But behind all of it was panic. Her hands had trembled when she poured Hope's milk. Her eyes kept darting to the door. Every knock, every vibration of her phone made her flinch. She couldn't live like this. Not again. So after Hope was tucked in and the house had gone quiet, she knocked gently on Jordan's study door. He looked up, surprised. Everything okay? She didn't answer right away. She just stepped inside, slowly, like she was entering something sacred. Then she sat down, and without any warning, her voice cracked. I saw him. Jordan's expression changed, just slightly, but his eyes sharpened. Who? She looked at him, her throat tightening. Isaac. And then it all came out. The text message, the encounter outside her office, the way he looked at her, the way he asked for help, as if none of it, none of the pain, the betrayal, the abandonment, had ever happened. I didn't want to tell you, she whispered. I thought maybe it would just pass, that he'd leave if I ignored him. Jordan sat completely still. Then he stood up, walked slowly to the far window, and stared out at the night. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, but with unmistakable anger in his voice, he doesn't deserve a second of your time. His fists were clenched, not out of fear, out of fury. This man stole your life, left you with nothing, and now he wants to crawl back in like nothing happened? Amelia didn't reply. She couldn't, because she agreed. But still, some part of her had been shaken. That old fear, that memory of being powerless, it had returned, and it made her feel like the ground beneath her feet could vanish again. Jordan turned back to her. His face was calm now, but his eyes were steel. I'll handle it, he said, and she believed him. Not out of dependence, but because for once someone was standing beside her, not above her, not to control her, but to shield her. That night, Jordan made a call. Just one. By morning, he had answers. Isaac wasn't just a mistake from Amelia's past. He was a storm waiting to destroy everything in his path. He was in debt, deep, owed money to people no one dared to owe, had scammed more than a few women, and had outstanding warrants for fraud in 2 cities. His reappearance wasn't about closure. It wasn't guilt or love or redemption. It was survival. He needed money. Again. And when he saw Amelia, when he saw her life, her clothes, her smile, he saw a target. Jordan hung up the call and sat there, fingers steepled, heart pounding. He thought about what would have happened if Amelia had gone with Isaac, if she'd answered that text, if she hadn't walked away outside that office building. He didn't want to think any further. He wouldn't let that man near her. Not now. Not ever again. He opened his laptop, pulled up a list of private security contacts, and began typing, because the past had found its way to her doorstep. But this time, it wouldn't be allowed inside. A few weeks passed. The tension that Isaac had brought into their lives slowly began to dissolve, not by forgetting, but by choosing peace and choosing each other. Jordan never brought up Isaac again, not directly. But the way he watched over Amelia, the way he made sure Hope's daycare had upgraded security, the way he walked her to her car and insisted on night lights throughout the house, those things said more than words ever could. Amelia noticed. She noticed everything, and in the quiet spaces between responsibilities and healing, something began to grow, something warm, something lasting. One morning after a particularly long week, Jordan appeared in Amelia's room doorway with a small envelope and an excited look on his face. "What's this?" she asked, still in her robe, brushing Hope's curls. "A break," he smiled. "For you, for Hope, for me." Inside the envelope, plane tickets. A beach resort, 4 days. No phones. Just peace. Amelia hesitated at first. "Jordan, I have work. I've already called your supervisor. You're cleared. But school. I talked to your professor. You're ahead." She blinked at him, stunned. "You planned all this?" "I planned it," he said gently, "because you never would." And so, for the first time in years, Amelia packed for joy, not out of necessity, not for survival, but for something soft, something special. The resort was nestled on the edge of a coastal town, where palm trees lined golden shores and the waves sang lullabies to the breeze. The air smelled like salt and fresh fruit, and Hope spent most of the day building sandcastles, while Amelia laid beside her in a hammock, eyes closed, soaking in the sun. Jordan watched them from a distance sometimes, smiling softly. He didn't interrupt, he just watched. Because this was the picture he had carried in his heart for years. Even back in high school, when Amelia barely knew he existed, he'd always imagined her smiling like that, free, full, unburdened. On the third evening, just before sunset, Jordan asked Amelia if she'd take a walk with him along the shoreline while Hope napped in the care of one of the resort nannies. They walked barefoot along the wet sand. The sky above them was painted with streaks of orange, pink, and violet, like a canvas touched by heaven itself. At first, they just talked, about little things. How Hope now said vanilla instead of vanilla. How Amelia still couldn't figure out how to pronounce quinoa. How Jordan secretly watched animated films alone when he couldn't sleep. And then the silence came. The soft kind. The one where hearts speak louder than words. Amelia stopped walking. "Jordan?" But he was already kneeling. Right there, with the tide brushing at his knees and the wind tussling his hair. In his hand, a small velvet box. She froze. And in that still moment between heartbeats, her world shifted. Jordan looked up at her, eyes steady, voice gentle. "I've loved you since I was 16. Back then, I thought you were unreachable, a dream I didn't dare wake up from. But life gave me the chance to know you, to see your strength, to watch you raise the most incredible little girl I've ever met." He paused, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "You changed my world twice, Amelia. Once when I first met you, and again when I found you sitting on that sidewalk. Let me spend the rest of my life changing yours, not with wealth or gifts, but with safety, with laughter, with love." Tears were already falling down her cheeks, and she wasn't the only one. "I'm not perfect," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "but I will fight for you, for her, for us, every single day." He opened the box. Inside, the most delicate, elegant ring, a single stone, soft and shining like moonlight caught in silver. "Will you marry me?" Amelia's hands covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook as tears poured down. And then, through trembling lips, she whispered, "Yes." She didn't just say it once, she said it again and again. "Yes, yes, yes." He stood, slipping the ring onto her finger. She fell into his arms, sobbing, not out of sadness, not even just joy, but out of release. Out of the quiet, overwhelming knowing that for the first time in her life, she was truly safe. That night, under the soft roar of the ocean and beneath a sky full of stars, Amelia sat beside Jordan on a deck chair with Hope curled between them, fast asleep. No words were needed. She held Jordan's hand tightly in hers, glancing down at the ring every now and then, not to admire its beauty, but to remind herself that this was real, that someone saw her brokenness and chose her anyway, that from the ashes of her past she had built something beautiful, and it was only the beginning. Time passed gently, like waves brushing against a calm shore. Since the proposal, Amelia had started to laugh more, smile freely. Her eyes no longer darted around the room expecting bad news. Her body no longer braced for things to fall apart. She had settled into something she never thought she'd find again: peace. Jordan, true to his word, didn't just love her. He supported her, championed her, protected her. And Hope, oh, sweet Hope, thrived in the quiet love that now filled their home. There were mornings when Jordan would come into the living room to find Hope brushing Amelia's hair with a plastic toy comb, giggling as if the world outside didn't exist. And there were nights when the three of them would curl up on the couch, a blanket over their legs, popcorn in their laps, watching cartoons that Jordan claimed were for Hope. But he always laughed the loudest. Then one morning, Amelia felt it. A wave of nausea, unshakable exhaustion, and a strange fluttering feeling low in her belly. She brushed it off at first, maybe stress, maybe hormones, maybe just a bad lunch the day before, but it didn't stop. A few days later, while helping Hope into her daycare shoes, she suddenly stood up too fast and nearly fainted. Jordan rushed to her side. "That's it. You're seeing a doctor. Today." She resisted at first, insisting it was nothing. But he insisted harder. And later that afternoon, they found themselves sitting in a quiet clinic room with the scent of hand sanitizer and soft music playing overhead. The doctor ran some routine checks, asked a few questions, and finally brought in the ultrasound machine. "Just to rule a few things out," she said warmly. Amelia lay on the exam table, nervous, hands resting over her stomach. Jordan sat beside her, holding her fingers gently. Then the screen lit up, a heartbeat, and then another. The room froze. The doctor smiled brightly. "Well, I hope you like surprises." Jordan leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The doctor turned the screen slightly toward them and pointed. "You're pregnant," she said, her voice soft but brimming with joy. "And it's twins." There was silence. Amelia's mouth parted, her eyes widened, lips trembling, and then laughter. A breathy, disbelieving laugh followed almost immediately by tears. Tears that came hard and fast, the kind that catch in your throat and pull everything out at once. Joy, fear, wonder, gratitude. She covered her face with both hands and cried. Jordan didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at the screen. 2 tiny heartbeats, 2 new beginnings. He reached for her hand and kissed it gently, his voice cracking. "Our family just doubled." Amelia turned her head toward him, eyes still wet, cheeks flushed with emotion. "I never thought," she whispered. "I never thought I'd have this." Jordan leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "Well, you do," he said. "You have us, and we have you, all of you." They stayed like that for a long moment, letting it sink in, letting the miracle of it all unfold without rushing it. That night, they walked into Hope's room together, watching her sleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. Amelia ran her fingers through her daughter's soft curls and whispered, "You're going to be a big sister." Jordan wrapped an arm around her from behind, resting his hand gently on her stomach. "I hope they get your kindness," he whispered. Amelia smiled, "and your strength." The road hadn't been easy, but somewhere between heartbreak and healing, a new story had begun. A story with more than one happy ending, and it had only just begun. And here brings us to the end of the story. A story of pain, of survival, and of love that bloomed in the most unexpected way. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Humanity Stories for more emotional and thought-provoking tales like this. And if you've ever experienced a moment that changed your life forever, share it in the comments. We'd love to hear your story too. Until next time, keep believing in kindness.